We've talked about so much Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC. What will it look like? Well, we saw Texas last year, right? They go into Bama. They beat Bama. So everybody felt like, for Texas at least, with all the success that they had a season ago, that Texas was going to be SEC ready based off of what they did to Alabama early in the year last year. Well, here's the truth. We haven't seen Oklahoma be in an SEC schedule, and now they start that slate. And it's ironic, Joe. We talked about this in the Open. They're starting against a former quarterback of theirs in Josh Heupel. And Tennessee going into Norman is going to be a big deal. It's a premier matchup of the week. I turn it over to you here. When you look at this matchup, what do you see happening?
So I was fully prepared to come into this segment, Blake, and say that I thought that Oklahoma was going to get smoked. I really did. Tennessee has been on a ridiculous roll, and I know that two of those games have been against Chattanooga and Kent State, who they were up 65-0 at halftime on, but they also completely demolished NC State. That is an ACC opponent that's supposed to be a competent and competitive team in the ACC, and you completely embarrassed them. They're averaging 63 points per game right now, compared to the 4.3 that their opponents are averaging, 336 rushing yards, 7 yards per carry. They're doing some goofy stuff statistically. I was fully ready to be able to say here, even though Tennessee hasn't faced anyone, I'm buying in. Oklahoma hasn't really played anybody either, but I have to give Oklahoma where the credit is due. Offensively, they're working through some stuff right now. Jackson Arnold's still not there. He's still making mistakes. He's still turning the ball over. The offensive line, like we predicted in the offseason, is not meshing together the way that it could. But the biggest thing that I get to give Oklahoma credit for, Brent Venables has himself a defense. That defense is phenomenal. They played so poorly on offense against Houston, but that defense came downhill hard as hell, got after Donovan Smith. They wrapped up. They produced pressures. Right now, they're only allowing 166 pass yards per game. I misread that. They're only allowing 77 rush yards per game. 2.2 yards per carry is what they're allowing. They're also only allowing 30% on third downs to their opponents. So they are really, really freaking good on defense. If this game is kept close, it's going to be because they're able to produce pressures on Nico, and they're able to play a really stout game on D.
I think that they can do that early. Okay, but there's three main questions that I have going into this game. A lot of them revolved around Oklahoma. Number one, can their O-line protect Jackson Arnold enough? And then number two, look, Arnold last week, as an example, had to use his legs a lot. He was getting pressured a lot. Look, Tulane had 3 sacks in the second half. I know that they got up big, but they couldn't finish. And I know that this happens with a new team or a younger team, especially when you're talking offensively. Look, you started out hot. Jackson Arnold was running with his legs a lot, but you couldn't finish off Tulane, right? They kept him around. They let him stay around. Joe, they gave up 3 sacks in the second half, and then one of them that should have been a 4th sack, Jackson Arnold evades the pressure, and then he throws a pick 6 to Grubbs and then the game's, it's a 1-score game. Okay, look, people will forget with about 9 minutes to go in that game against Tulane, Oklahoma more than likely should have been called for a pass interference on that 4th down call that would have kept the drive going for Tulane. They got really bailed out there, and Bowman on a tip pass got a pick. Their defense is really good, and I agree with that. The question becomes is, Joe, I think Tennessee's defensive line in front seven is really good too. I think they're really good. And so when I look at a bad O-line and a quarterback that's still learning, even though I think Jackson Arnold has shown that he can be very athletic, he showed that last week, my biggest question mark is I think that the biggest disadvantage for Oklahoma right now is Tennessee's front seven versus their offensive line and their running game. Joe, Jackson Arnold is their leading rusher on the year. Now, Tatum, the freshman, got going last week. He had a pair of touchdowns. He looked good. I don't know if they can run the football. Joe, what makes me believe that they can run the football at an effective rate when there's times that you can't do it against Tulane and you can't do it against Houston? But I look at the other side of this too, and it makes me cautious about saying that Tulane or Tennessee, would blow them out. I'm not predicting them to blow them out either.
Yeah.
Because I think that Oklahoma's defense, to your point, is good enough to force Nico into some bad decisions. Look, we saw NC State do it, and that defense is not as good as this Oklahoma one. But what do we know? They're going to continue to put pressure on you, meaning Tennessee, as the game goes on. And I just don't know, Joe, that Oklahoma can score enough points to beat Tennessee. I fully believe that this game, because of the build-up, college game day, all this stuff, Oklahoma's going to come out on fire. They might even go up in this game. But I think as the game goes on and it wears on and the game continues, Tennessee's just going to put too much pressure on them. I will remind you of this. Oklahoma gave up 6 sacks the last 2 weeks, 3 to Houston and 3 to Tulane. And I think that in and of itself worries me enough. But I really like what I see from Jackson Arnold with his athleticism. But he's had to run in some of these instances because of how bad his offensive line has been.
That's what I'm getting at here, is that I'm just trying to paint the picture that anyone who wants to just completely run away with this Oklahoma team's not ready for the SEC, they're going to get their asses whooped, this is going to be an embarrassment, yada, 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 to point out the performances that they've had in the first 3 weeks against Tulane and Houston. Some mistakes were made. That to me is not fully reading into the situation. Their defense is good enough to keep this game within striking distance for periods throughout. But what you just brought up, I don't have a lot of faith right now in this Oklahoma offense. I think they're still figuring themselves out. Where the stat that I misread earlier that I was trying to save for this point, they're only averaging 166 pass yards per game. 5.48 yards per attempt is extremely inefficient. And when you watch them play, they're not really taking a lot of shots. They're not connecting past the sticks.
Well,
there's a lot of times
trying to.
Right.
I mean, the film shows that they're not trying to. They're getting burks out and screens very quick.
Yes.
They're not even trying.
I don't like that. It almost feels like maybe there's some sort of training wheels on Jackson Arnold. It feels like the general rhythm of the offense is just not there.
Let me rudely interrupt you because you watch a lot of film. Are they putting training wheels on him, or is their O-line so bad that they don't want to get him killed that they're getting the ball out quick?
I'm not going to be able to speak to that with a ton of confidence, but I think that the offensive line stuff does feel like it comes into play here. The offensive line is probably the most concerning part because you got a young quarterback who has made some good plays, but can be mistake prone. We saw that in the bowl game. We saw it against Houston. He had a pretty bad interception that he threw.
Saw it against Tulane. That brought him back in the game. That pick six was crucial.
He can be mistake prone and also make back-breaking mistakes that can really, really hurt you. The offensive line not being as good as it could be because it's a completely new group is going to be an important talking point for this game. Even though James Pierce Jr. hasn't been as productive as we have been projecting, the rest of that defensive line is really freaking good. I mean, we saw how they played against NC State. That could be, if there is a separation point and this ends up being more than a 10-point game, it's going to be because they get after Jackson Arnold and they just can't move the ball.
Did you see the stat where James Pierce Jr. hasn't played the last 20 minutes of any game that they've played this year?
Well, right. That again, this is another example of everything requires context, and I think a lot of people. I saw people tweeting that James Pierce Jr. sucks, and it's like, come on, we can't. They played nobody. They're not playing to most of these games. They're saving them for a game like this.
Well, correct, and that's the part where I would be most concerned. Here's another thing that I don't think people are aware of because I think a lot of people are seeing Tennessee score this much. Maybe they watched them against NC State. Joe, I want to talk about this run game for Tennessee, okay, versus this Oklahoma defense. This is something that I also think, too. If you cannot move the football offensively and this hurry-up offense for Tennessee keeps rolling, they're not going to give up on the running game. And I think late in this game, Dylan Sampson and company are going to line up and run right through them. I get and I agree that Oklahoma, believe it or not, I think they're a top 3, top 4, maybe defense in the SEC this year, but they're not playing complementary football. And when you can't play complementary football, then that wears down on your defense. You got a good rotation along your defensive line. I think you got a good rotation in your secondary at times. I just don't know if they have enough because they're going to go. And I don't know if you can score enough with them. Now, I want to throw this your way, too, because I think this is the only way that they can beat them. Nico's got to make bad decisions. And, again, NC State, forced Nico into two very bad decisions. Now, one, his arm got hit, but it still was a bad decision. Joe, do you think we need to look? There's two young quarterbacks in here. Nico's not flawless either. He's played two really bad teams, and then the good team, the P4 team he played, he did have two picks. I mean, I
don't think he played bad against NC State.
He played. He didn't play like everybody's. Joe, at the current moment,
I disagree. For young quarterback, throwing a pick's not a big deal, man. I always stand by. I'd much rather have a young quarterback take chances. The Nico mistakes are not as bad as the Jackson Arnold mistakes. They're not built differently. They're not built the same. They're built very differently.
I'm not talking about Jackson Arnold. I'm not comparing him. What I'm saying is one of the only P4 opponents that he played, he made mistakes. And by the way, this by far, because against Iowa, those guys were out. Most of those guys were out. Was it Cooper DeJean was out, or whoever the guy that went to Philly was out? This is the best defense that he's ever played. And I know one damn thing. Brent Venables is going to send the house at you. Joe Burrow said this after the national championship game when they played Clemson. He said, I've never, and he said this like 2 years ago. He said the coach that confused me the most in the beginning of the game ever was Brent Venables.
Well, it's because he had the signs.
All right. I don't think he had the signs against LSU.
Sorry, I had to get that in.
you can't get off of that one. But
I won't.
To the point, I think that they can force Nico into some mistakes here.
I think with what you're saying, if Oklahoma does pull this game out, if they do win it, if this game ends up being within a touchdown, and if, let's say, the line are now 7.5. If Oklahoma covers or wins, there's two things that are going to happen. One, what you're just saying there, where Nico turns the ball over 2 times like he did against NC State. And two, if that defense and that defensive line steps up and stymies the Tennessee rushing attack, which has been phenomenal. Again, they're rushing for 336 yards per game, which is
9
huge.
touchdowns.
Yeah, they have been putting up insane numbers on the ground, and a good bit of that has just been running out the clock. But I still stand by. I was extremely impressed the way that they flowed to the football, and they were aggressively flowing to the football in the film and the games that I watched of them. Stutzman's been phenomenal. Like, he has been fantastic. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that it could happen, that they play a really good game against this rushing attack, but I still think that Tennessee's going to be fine. I really do. I think that Nico is showing a lot of bright things. I stand by young quarterbacks who take risks, and even if they fail in those risk attempts, they're going to lead to huge successes in the future. I thought that the ball where it was tipped up, I don't blame him for it. And the second one, it was on him, but he was trying to be overly aggressive. Overly aggressive young players are good.
I don't mind it either, but in crucial games, that does matter.
It does.
Like, I'm looking at the game as just the game. Like, I don't think that Nico, I think Nico's going to be a number 1 overall pick. I think he has that ability. I think they got to let him loose with his legs a little bit too. I think Jackson Arnold is athletic enough. He can use his legs. You got to make him use his legs, and he's going to have to. And if I'm Brent Venables, I'm saying, listen, you got to get positive yardage. Joe, I'm not saying to do this. If his second read's not there, I'm out. I'm dead serious, because every time, if you go back and watch that Tulane game, when he's getting to his third read, his fourth read, whatever it may be, Joe, he has no time. Like, and we're talking about Pat Jenkins and those guys at Tulane. Like, this isn't Tulane. And I think that Oklahoma fans, for what it's worth, who, by the way, poo-pooed on me, a former offensive lineman all offseason, every time we talked about Oklahoma, every single time we spoke about Oklahoma, my whole thing was, you cannot have that many transfers along the offensive line and be a cohesive unit. I don't care how talented they are.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, you're about to find out. I think this game is close early. I could even see it being tied at half. I think
they're going to separate.
And then they're going to separate. That's how I would project the game to go. So you're picking Tennessee. I guess to wrap this up, you're picking Tennessee.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. I don't know. I think that Oklahoma can keep it within 10 points because of how good their defense is. And this could be relatively low scoring than people expect. But for everything we're talking about here, the Oklahoma offense has been not as effective as it could be. It's just a tough situation for them to step into with how explosive Tennessee is.
Here's another question. I'm going to pick Tennessee. Okay, when we do our picks, here's a question that I have. I know that Oklahoma is good defensively. My question would be, is in the last 2 years outside of Texas, have they gone against a team that can really stress them with the receivers and running game that they have? Because I really don't think that Texas could stress them the way that Tennessee can. And I think it's a really good matchup for those DBs and corners. So we'll see. I'm going to pick Tennessee in this one. All right.
This video is sponsored by the online fitness training camp presented by Chris Gates Fitness. When I first started talking about Chris, about partnering with our show, not only was I excited to have a fitness sponsor for our pod, but more importantly, when I found out about how he can help people achieve their goals, I was even more bought in, because when the football season starts, it is so tough to stay on top of things and also to be able to enjoy yourself on Saturdays when it's game day. With Chris Gates Fitness's online training camp, you're going to be able to effectively stay focused, consistent, burn fat, build muscle, and do it with a like-minded community of individuals working towards the same thing. On top of this, you're going to be able to get direct coaching from Chris and the ability to ask him questions with an access to a live Q&A where you can get direct personalized support from Chris himself. Don't wait any longer. If you're trying to get in shape during this fall and you want to be able to do it with the right support system, head on over to chrisgatesfitness.com/trainingcamp or click the link in the description. And you need to do it today because you can get the first month. Personal training is expensive, folks. The first month for only $10 when you use that code RuffinoJoe. Don't wait any longer. Head on over there. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.